Hi, Brooke here with video number 1 of getting to use SketchUp for 3D printing. This is a very high level introduction to the basic layout of how SketchUp works. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to SketchUp. So you need to set up an account, but SketchUp is free. And when you click Start Modeling, you'll get an untitled model that you can then save. So this is what everything starts off with looking like when you first start SketchUp. The most important thing to know is that SketchUp relies a lot on some modifier keys, and there's a couple tricks that help get you up and running. It has kind of a little bit of a steep learning curve, and then there's a ton of resources out there available for getting you to know the model really well. Today we're just going to do just an introduction into the very basic things of how SketchUp works. On the left hand side you have drawing and navigating tools, and if you'll notice on the bottom down here on the left hand side, it will give you some hints about the tools. And over on the right hand bottom side it has measurements. This is really important because everything we want to do in SketchUp we want to do in very precise sizes. It's not good to model based on what it looks like, or you'll end up sometimes making like 100-foot tall something, and it's much better to pay attention to scale as much as possible. On the right hand side we have some things about model info. We'll talk about this. Outliner, this is important. We'll talk about the materials. This is, we don't need components. This is the 3D warehouse where you can download other people's models. We want materials, and if you notice, if you hover your mouse over these things, they'll show up. Styles, it'll tell you what it is. Hovering the mouse will tell you what it is. Styles are things we don't need. Tags we won't be using today. Scenes we won't be using today. Display we will use, so I'm going to click on that. And then model info is something that is important because this is where we will change units from inches or feet to centimeters or millimeters for 3D printing, and then solid inspector. So clicking on these things means that I get a window here where I can scroll up and down, and it has these tools for working with my model. I can hide this way. I can click at any point. This is model info. Entity info is, sorry, I said model info. Entity info is really important. So just as a little heads up. So I'm going to hide this, and I'm just going to dive right in to two things. The first is how to navigate in your model. So these tools, just like if you hover over here, it'll give you a hint of what something is. If you hover over a tool, it will tell you what the tool is, and then it will tell you the modifier key. So you use the modifier keys a lot. The first tool that is important is the orbit tool, which the modifier key is O. So if I click O, I can orbit. So this is how I drive around in the model. And then pan, the modifier key is H, so I can pan, and I can zoom in and out by scrolling the mouse or the trackpad. I'm going to show you a trick though. If I click O, each one of these tools will often have special super secret modifiers. So if you hold down the Option key or the Shift key, the tool will change. So right now I have the O, and I hold down the Shift key, and now I get the pan tool. So it makes it a lot easier to navigate the model. I can zoom in and out, and then hit the Shift key to get the pan tool to move around. Moving around in your model is really important. Oh my gosh, I'm lost. Where am I? I have no idea where I am. Then you click Zoom Extends, and then you'll get back into your model. And now I can zoom out and see this is Ty right here. Now Ty is just a little 2D figure. SketchUp always has a person that starts off here, and I just clicked spacebar to get back to my mouse key. The reason why they do that is so that you get an idea of scale. I usually delete them right away, but I'm going to leave Ty here because I think it's a little bit handy to have him. I'm going to click the orbit key, O, and move a little bit because I just want to be over here. I'm going to draw a rectangle real quick. This is the rectangle tool, R. And I'm just going to draw a rectangle. And I'm not going to talk about planes yet. The first thing I want to talk about is Sketchup geometry. So geometry, if I click on this, Sketchup is made of lines, which are called edges, and faces, which are planes. When geometry is connected, there is only one edge between two things. So if I were to make a copy of this rectangle and move it here, it looks like I have two rectangles, but I only have one edge connecting them. Okay, so this is an important distinction. Whenever I can click on something and highlight it, that means that it's what's called raw geometry. Now, the reason why that's important is because raw geometry sticks to itself. The most important thing in SketchUp is to not ever leave raw geometry. And so I will be always grouping or ungrouping things to make individual things as opposed to this raw geometry. I can, with the mouse tool, I can select stuff by either going to the left and to the right or to the right and to the left. Play around with how the selection tool works, whether I select left or right, because this is really, really important. If I select left to right, I have to select the entire thing to be able to delete it or select it. If I select left to right, I can just, it'll select whatever the line passes through. I just clicked delete and I deleted that. I'm going to use the push-pull tool right here to bring this into 3D. Okay, so now I have a cube. I can see I have a cube. And I'm not caring about what size it is right now, but I do want to show you how to make it a group and ungroup it. And the reason is, so if I triple click on raw geometry, everything will get, everything that's touching it will connect. So I triple click and I'm going to select the entire thing and then control click and make it a group. Okay, so now I have a group. I'm going to use the move tool, M, and by the way, down here, this is the full palette of tools that we'll be using. I'm going to use the move tool and I can move it. Okay, now notice as I'm moving, you can see there's this black line and it's either black or it's green or it's yellow or it's red. That means that I'm moving along the planes. You pretty much always want it to be either, you almost never want to move in a black direction because that means you're using two different, you're going across two different axes. And so it makes it really hard. Like I want to try and put this on top of his head and it looks like, okay, I've got this on top of his head and I think it's exactly where I want. But now if I go to orbit around, it's all the way over here. So this is one of the most frustrating things when you're first learning SketchUp. So I'm going to go back to the move tool and the arrow keys, if you notice arrow keys toggle lock inference direction. So if I click on the arrow key, see how it says lock to green, lock to red, lock to blue. Blue, by the way, it's yellow because this is, you can change the color of the axes, and we changed the color of the axes at one point, so it's supposed to be blue. Okay, so I can move any direction, but if I now, so I've now clicked and I'm dragging, I want to move on the red axis. Let's see, constrained on line. Okay, so now I can only move on the red axis. So now I can come right over to where this guy is and click here. SketchUp has corners that you can click to, and it'll also find the midpoint in a group. So I want to put this right on his head. I'm going to click. I want to make sure that I'm on the right axis. So I clicked on the red axis, and this is called snapping inferences. So I'm now saying I want to be right in the middle of his head, okay? Now, if I want to move it to the right, now I'm going to click M again, and I'm going to now lock it to the green axis and click here. And now I'm going to click M again, lock it to what's the blue axis, and I want to go to his head, but I need to change the angle. So now I just am going to lock and then go to his head. Whoops. Top of his head. Okay, so now you can see I'm closer to the top of his head. This is where some of the stuff with SketchUp is tricky, is when you're trying to get stuff there. Let's see if I got it on his head. Yeah, so now it's exactly on his head. So if you want to move stuff, sometimes it works best to move it, instead of going from here to here, moving it in 3 steps. Okay, so you can also use the shift key. So if I clicked M and I'm going to start dragging. If I start dragging and I like the fact that I picked the green axis, if I hold shift, I didn't use an arrow key. Instead, I just am holding the shift key and it's locking it onto this green axis. If I wanted to lock it on the red axis, once I start moving it, I can hold the shift key. So you don't have to use the arrow keys. Now, if you click escape, that was the escape key, you stop doing what you're doing. So if I want to have this come back into raw geometry, I'm going to click the space bar so I can select it, and then I can do explode. Now this is raw geometry again. Just really quickly, I want to show you the reason why you need to do groups versus raw geometry. Okay, I'm going to click the M tool, and I want to make a copy of this. Okay, if I want to make a copy, I click the M tool, and I can move it. We know that. But if I hit the modifier key Option, if I click the Option key, I get a little plus sign next to it. Now when I click and drag, I've made a copy. So that's how 99.9% of the time I make copies of something in SketchUp. I don't do copy and paste. I use the Move key and I use Option to make a copy of it. Now I'm going to make another copy and move it over here. Okay. And now this copy, I hit spacebar, I'm going to make this a group. So now this is a group, this is all raw geometry. So now let's say I want to put one box next to the other box. Okay? But I decide, oh shoot, I actually don't like that. Uh-oh. Now I can't move them, because like I said before, you can only ever have one face or one edge between two objects. So that's not what I want to do. So I can select this and delete this. But now that I've made this a group, if I use the M key, I can now click and move these as independent groups. Okay, so that's the basic, just super, super high level. Play around with using some of these drawing tools, circles and arcs. Another thing that's important to remember is, in order to have a face, you have to have all lines connecting in a single plane. Okay. The other thing, one last thing I want to mention is when you're working in groups, if I wanted to edit this, I can double click on it and see this bounding box means that I'm now editing within the group. I can hit P for the push-pull tool, and make this smaller. Just like the move tool, if I click option, I get a plus sign. See what it does there? If I do a plus sign, it will, the move tool will add a face and then add geometry. If I don't use the plus tool, so I'm moving this right now, I click the option key again, I take the plus tool away, or the plus sign away. You can see that it just is going to make this bigger and smaller. This is the inference thing that I was talking about, where I can make this the same size, I can make this smaller, I can make, I can use the push-pull tool in all kinds of different ways, plus or with the plus or without the plus. Now that I'm done editing the group, I can either click outside the group or I can just click the escape key. Okay? So play around with the tools and play around with navigating. So draw a bunch of stuff and try to move it to different places. Like I want to go to the origin here. That can be kind of tricky. So I can lock it into the green and click an inference. Lock it into the blue or yellow, click an inference, lock it there. I don't usually draw on the origin, but it can be very helpful sometimes to do that. So, so play around. If you get lost in your model, remember that you can always do zoom extends. You can click on stuff and hit the delete key to delete things. That part's pretty simple. So the part that is a little bit tricky is knowing how to not get lost in your model and how to navigate. So play around with that and play with making some basic geometry. And we can talk about, this is the offset tool, and these are the solid tools that are really super, super, super important for 3D printing. So we'll learn how to use those. And so just start playing around. This is just the first step.